Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be talking to you about algebraic expressions, how to identify them and write them. Alright, so let's take a look at a couple of terms you'll need to know in order to be able to do this. First of all, what a variable is. A variable is simply an unknown. It takes the place of something we don't know in math. So you can really use any letter to represent it, or symbol for that matter, but typically you'll see them written with letters. You also have coefficient. A coefficient is the number in front of a variable. So in this case, you can see in that example, that first example there, that you have 3x. 3 is your coefficient. And then the second example, you have -2. -2 is the coefficient, and it's really just a fancy word for a number that is directly in front of a variable or being multiplied by a variable, because that's exactly what's happening. An algebraic expression is an expression that includes numbers and variables. So you can see here down at the bottom, 3x plus 5 includes numbers and variables as well as operations, of course. And then finally x minus 5. So those are just a couple examples of that. So let's take a look at what you'll be doing. And in order to do that, you're going to need to know your addition terms, okay? All the different words for addition, because what they're going to give you are problems that you'll have to write out in algebraic expressions. So you'll need to be able to identify words like increase by, or phrases like increase by, more than, sum, total, and add. Those are probably the 5 most popular words used to represent addition. Next, you're going to need to know your subtraction terms. Those are words like decreased by, of course, subtract, less than, minus, difference, and fewer. Okay, these are all the words that are used to represent subtraction in these problems that we're about to do. And you can always go back and reference these if need be. Multiplication terms, words like times, product, multiplied by, of course, of, and per. You probably may not think of those two as representing multiplication, but they actually do in quite a bit of word problems. So those are a couple of good terms right there to remember. And then finally, your division terms. Division terms would be things like divided by, of course, quotient, and groups of. This one, again, not as common, but it is used every now and then. And then as far as the specialty phrases you'll need to know, there are also some phrases that will you'll have to identify to include parentheses, okay? So these phrases require parentheses, or basically will tell you when you identify them that, oh, I've got to use parentheses in this when I write this expression. And that is the sum of and the difference of. Those two will require parentheses because they actually want you to do the addition or the subtraction before something else. And that actually goes back to order of operations. Okay? You don't typically do addition or subtraction before multiplication and division unless that addition and subtraction is in parentheses. Alright, so let's take a look at some examples of what you'll be asked to do. The first thing we're going to look at is writing them out. Okay? So they're going to give these phrases to you in words. Or the expressions in words, and you're going to change them over to the actual mathematical version. So how would we represent 10 more than a number? Well, the reason why I gave you those list of phrases a moment ago is so that you can identify the words within these particular problems that tell you what operation to use. So for instance, the phrase here would be more than. Okay, where did we see more than? All the way back at the beginning, addition. So to write this out, you could write it out technically two ways. You could write this out as 10 plus a number, which again, this phrase here just simply means to use a variable. So 10 plus x, or you could also write it as x plus 10. Now I would ask you typically here why you can write it two ways like this. And hopefully your answer would be because addition is commutative, which you will learn in another lesson. However, if you didn't know that, just know that when you use the words more than, that you can see it written both ways, just like that. Any of these addition problems can be written those two ways. You just flip them back and forth. Alright, so the next one here would be a number decreased by 17. Alright, so again, you need to think to yourself, where did I see decreased by? Well, again, decrease meaning going down, and there's only really one operation that means to go down directly, and that would be subtraction. So a number, again, that phrase a number means to use a variable. X decreased by subtraction 17. Just like that. And again, it's just a matter of you knowing and identifying the phrases within these problems that means subtraction or addition or multiplication or division. May take a bit of studying. All right, so let's take a look at a couple more here. The quotient of 9 and a number. All right, the quotient of 9 and a number. So again, where did quotient show up? Well, we've talked about quotient in a couple different lessons, but the quotient of 9 and a number, again, quotient meaning the answer to a division problem. So we're going to do 9 divided by a number, which in this case we'll just use x. So that means 9 divided by x. All right, the next one, 9 times the sum of 4 and a number. So again, we have actually a couple things to look at here. We have times, which we should remember is always multiplication. And then again, we also have this phrase, the sum of, okay? That can get a little tricky. The last group of phrases, or the last two phrases I showed you, meant parentheses. There's one of them right here. The sum of. The other one was the difference of. When you see that, that means you need to include parentheses within your actual expression. So, we're going to rewrite this out. 9 times the sum of 4. So the sum of 4 and a number means that 4 and a number would go in the parentheses. 4 plus x in the parentheses, because the sum of 4 and a number would be 4 plus x. Now 9 times that would mean that 9 then would be outside the parentheses. Now you can write it just like that. You can also put a multiplication sign in there, a little dot, or the little x for the multiplication, but that's how this expression would be written out. The key is identifying that phrase right there, the sum of, because that tells you that parentheses are necessary. If we don't put the parentheses there, what you're saying then is that the math needs to be 9 times 4 first, and that's not what they're asking. They're wanting you to do the addition first, then multiply. And that's where it can get a little tricky, because if you're not familiar with order of operations, that may not make a whole lot of sense to you. So you may want to go check out that video. All right, the sum of 4 and the quotient of 12 in a number. So again, we're seeing the sum of 4 and the quotient, here's your other term, the quotient of 12 in a number. So the quotient of 12 in a number would be 12 divided by x, or let me write it with the division sign instead. 12 divided by x. All right. The sum of 4 and the quotient of 12 in a number. This time they put the sum of in there. You don't necessarily need parentheses, but you can put it in there if you want. This would be 4 plus 12 divided by x. Now, technically everything would be included in the parentheses, but they're really not necessary here. They're just wanting you to add 4 to whatever you get in that division, 12 divided by x. But because division comes before addition in the order of operations, you would do that first. So you could technically rewrite this as 12 divided by x in parentheses, then plus 4. But again, it's not necessary to do that. Either way, it'll work just fine. All right, with these next few examples, we're going to look at actually writing them out in words. Okay, and what I want you to focus on here is expanding your vocabulary a bit. So for instance, when you're looking at the problem x plus 5, your teacher is going to want you to use something other than x plus 5, because that's the obvious. So when you take a test, you shouldn't assume that you're going to see that. You're probably going to see words like sum of, or increase by, or more than. So you need to try to think of ways to write this out in words, x plus 5 in words, using that vocabulary. So my suggestion here would be something like 5 more than a number. All right. Or how about x increased by 5? Excuse my writing there. But you can see we're using the different vocabulary to denote the same thing rather than just saying x plus 5, which is the obvious, of course. Not that if you wrote that it would be wrong. However, if you're taking some type of test, I wouldn't expect that that would be what they would use as their example. They would probably use some of those more what I would like to call more grown-up math words. Okay, they want that extra vocabulary in there. So the next one, you can see here that we actually have 2x minus 3. Okay, and in 2x minus 3 we have two operations. Remember, when a number is directly in front of a variable, that's called a coefficient. And what that means mathematically is you're multiplying 2 times x. So we need to incorporate multiplication as well as subtraction in our writing, in our writing of our expression. So we have a couple options here. We can use words like, for subtraction, decrease by, less than, fewer than. Okay, but for multiplication, we can use things like product, multiplied by. Okay, so in this case, since it's 2, you could almost say doubled. But let's stick to what most likely you will see, and that's product. So you're going to do, I would say, something to this effect: 3 less than the product of two and a number. And I'm pretty sure your teacher would be satisfied with that, because you're using the word less than for subtraction, and you're using product to denote multiplication, which is exactly what they're going to want to see. And of course, there's some other ones you could use. You could say something like 2 times a number minus 3. Let's see. You could also use the word less, just less, not less than. So the product of 2 less 3, something to that effect. It's fine. Any of those. All right, and then we'll look at the last one here. The last one incorporates the parentheses, and I gave you a couple phrases for that, one for addition and one for subtraction. So if you need to revert back to that, you can. First of all, we need to make sure we take care of the parentheses first here. So, and technically you don't have to, but it's good to, so you don't forget to use that phrasing. The phrasing, again, is the difference of. You say the whole phrase out, the difference of a number and 7. So the difference of, and I'm going to abbreviate here, the difference, I'll write it out, there we go, of a number and 7 you could say times 3. All right, that's just one way to write it. Another way to write it would be the product of 3 and the sum of a number minus 7. Something like that. Okay, any way you want to write it using that phrase, but the difference of needs to be a part of it to show that we need to do that subtraction before we go and multiply by 3. All right, this has been a quick tutorial of writing algebraic expressions. Thank you for joining me.